Before America had a name, before independence, before the idea of a nation even existed, there walked a young boy through the streets of Philadelphia holding 3 loaves of bread. His clothes were rumpled, his pockets were empty, and his future was uncertain. But he carried something more powerful than wealth or status. He carried a mind hungry for knowledge, and a quiet determination that would shape the future of a continent. This is the story of Benjamin Franklin, a runaway teenager who transformed himself into one of the most extraordinary humans in history. A thinker who blended humor with wisdom. A scientist who played with lightning. A statesman who charmed kings. And a deeply imperfect but endlessly evolving man whose curiosity never stopped growing. Welcome to Wise Book Summaries, where books become journeys and great lives become lessons that guide your own path forward. Today, we explore Walter Isaacson's masterpiece, Benjamin Franklin, An American Life, through a calm, reflective, 30 to 35-minute narration. A story of reinvention, ambition, humility, and service. A story that teaches us that the most powerful tool any human can possess is a curious mind. Let us begin gently, with the early footsteps of a boy who had no idea that he would one day become one of the most admired men on earth. Benjamin Franklin was born in Boston in 1706, the 15th of 17 children in a small, busy household. His father, Josiah Franklin, was a candle and soap maker, a modest trade that left little room for luxury. But Franklin grew up surrounded by the smells of wax and tallow, and the steady rhythm of a household always in motion. From a young age, he showed a mind that sparkled with restlessness. Books became his first love. He devoured every page he could find, often borrowing books secretly, returning them before anyone noticed. Knowledge made his imagination expand far beyond the narrow lanes of Boston. By 12, he was working as an apprentice in his brother James's printing shop. Printing gave him access to a treasure, written words from across the colonies and overseas. But it was also a place of tension. Franklin was quick-witted and opinionated. James was strict, proud, and often harsh. Their arguments grew louder, their disagreements sharper. And over time, the small shop became a cage that Benjamin knew he had to escape. The turning point came when James punished him too severely one evening, pushing Benjamin from frustration into resolve. At 17, he made a decision that would change everything. Without money, without permission, and without a clear plan, he slipped away from Boston. It was illegal to leave an apprenticeship, and he risked arrest. But though he owned almost nothing, he carried one belief that made him brave: I must write my own destiny. His journey to Philadelphia was long, tiring, and uncertain. He traveled by boat, slept in strange places, and arrived in the city exhausted. And so, on that famous morning, dirty, tired, and hungry, he walked through Philadelphia's Market Street eating one loaf of bread while carrying the other 2 in his arms. People watching him laughed at the sight. But Franklin later wrote that this was the moment his new life truly began. He was anonymous, but free. Alone, but full of possibility. He found small jobs in local print shops, doing the tasks nobody else wanted. Sweeping floors. Cleaning ink rollers. Setting type by hand. He worked with quiet discipline, and even though he was young, he paid attention to everything: how the printing press worked, how business was managed, how editors interacted with readers. In the evenings, while others relaxed, Franklin read. He borrowed books from anyone willing to lend them. He studied language, philosophy, science, economics, history, anything he could get his hands on. Slowly, he sharpened his thinking, strengthened his writing, and developed a voice unique to him: clear, practical, humorous, and wise. Over time, Franklin saved enough money to open his own printing business. It was a small shop with second-hand equipment, but it carried his ambition. He poured himself into every page he printed. His work became known for its clarity and honesty. Soon, he published the Pennsylvania Gazette, a newspaper that would become one of the best in the colonies. Franklin filled its pages with insightful essays, witty commentary, and sharp observations about life. He often wrote anonymously or under playful pen names, enjoying the freedom to critique society and politics without attracting trouble. One of his early personas, Silence Dogood, became surprisingly popular. Through this fictional woman, he wrote humorous letters that poked fun at the world around him, religious hypocrisy, pretentious behavior, local gossip. Readers loved Silence Dogood, and Franklin learned something important: humor can deliver truth more effectively than anger. However, Franklin didn't stop at journalism. He wanted to build something bigger, an identity, a philosophy, a set of values for ordinary people to live by. And so, in 1732, he began publishing Poor Richard's Almanac. It became a cultural phenomenon. A mix of weather forecasts, puzzles, jokes, wisdom, and practical advice, the almanac reached homes across the colonies. Franklin filled it with short, memorable sayings that taught discipline, hard work, and frugality. Sayings like, "Early to bed and early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Well done is better than well said. An investment in knowledge pays the best interest." These simple lines spread far and wide, shaping the image of the self-made American. Franklin wasn't just offering advice, he was shaping an entire culture of personal responsibility and self-improvement. People began to see him as a voice of common sense, a man who could blend wisdom with wit, seriousness with humor. Behind the scenes, Franklin continued to reinvent himself. He practiced specific habits to shape his character. He created a personal list of 13 virtues, qualities like humility, frugality, order, sincerity, and calmness, and kept a small notebook tracking his progress every day. He believed that small improvements repeated over time created extraordinary results. This idea, revolutionary in his era, now feels almost modern. But even as he built a solid business and shaped his reputation, Franklin knew he was capable of more. Knowledge pulled him forward. Curiosity nudged him in new directions. He felt fascinated by nature, storms, heat, electricity, ocean currents. And it was this curiosity that would soon turn a successful printer into a world-renowned scientist. Franklin's dive into science began quietly, almost like an evening breeze entering an open window, gentle, curious, unassuming. It started with small experiments, tiny observations: why metal objects sparked, how storms moved across the sky, how heat transferred from one surface to another. What made Franklin unique was not just that he asked questions, but that he believed he could find the answers. He approached nature the way a printer approaches a blank page, with patience, with tools, with a willingness to try again and again until the ink settles cleanly. Electricity became his greatest fascination. In the early 1740s, the concept of electricity was mysterious, almost magical. People believed sparks were supernatural. Others thought they were spiritual forces. But Franklin sensed something deeper, something systematic and understandable. Using simple tools, jars, metal rods, glass tubes, and his famous Leyden-jar experiments, he studied how electricity moved, stored, and discharged. He named concepts we still use today: positive and negative charge, battery, conductor. These were not common terms, Franklin coined them. The language of modern electrical science carries his fingerprints across centuries. What made his experiments extraordinary was not their complexity, but their clarity. Franklin had a rare ability to observe a natural event, like a spark jumping between objects, and express it in simple, universal terms that anyone could understand. His notes traveled across oceans. London, Paris, Berlin, scientists everywhere were astonished by the insights coming from a printer in Philadelphia, a man far from the universities and academies of Europe. The moment that turned Franklin into a global scientific icon was his work with lightning. He began to suspect that lightning and electricity were the same phenomenon. It was a bold idea, because at the time, storms were considered almost divine forces. Challenging them was dangerous, not just physically, but intellectually. Yet Franklin trusted his instinct. He studied storms, the way lightning branched through clouds, the way it struck metal, the sound that followed. And eventually, he designed one of the most iconic experiments in scientific history, the kite experiment. Imagine a storm gathering. Thick clouds rolling. Wind picking up speed. Rain threatening. Franklin holding a simple kite made of silk, a metal key tied near the base, a thin string guiding it through the air. His son William standing nearby. The sky flashes. Thunder cracks. The kite rises into the storm. And then, exactly what he suspected. The wet string begins to vibrate. Fine strands of the hemp hair stand up. The key emits a faint, glowing spark. Franklin had done it. Nature had spoken its secret. Lightning was electricity. He never wrote dramatically about that moment. He didn't exaggerate the danger. He didn't boast about his courage. Instead, he documented the experiment with calmness, almost casual, as though it were just another daily observation. But the world reacted with amazement. Europe celebrated him as a genius. Royal societies honored him. Philosophers quoted him. And ordinary people finally understood lightning not as an unpredictable terror, but as a scientific event. This discovery gave birth to the lightning rod, one of Franklin's most important inventions. A simple metal rod placed atop buildings to safely guide lightning into the ground. Before lightning rods, houses, barns, and entire cities were vulnerable to fire during storms. After lightning rods, countless structures were saved. Lives were protected. Fire risks plummeted. Franklin turned a dangerous force of nature into a manageable one, a perfect symbol of his life's philosophy: understand the world, and you can improve it. His scientific career continued to grow, but Franklin's mind was always wider than any single field. While experimenting with electricity, he also invented bifocal eyeglasses, the Franklin stove, the flexible urinary catheter, and improvements to street lighting. His inventions rarely made him money, because he refused to patent them. He once said, "As we benefit from others' inventions, we should be glad to share our own." This spirit of open knowledge, of public service through innovation, made Franklin not just an inventor, but a benefactor of society. But even science was just one side of him. Franklin understood people as deeply as he understood nature. He was a master of building relationships, fostering community, and creating institutions that lasted long after him. One of his greatest contributions was the formation of the Junto, a group of young thinkers who met weekly to discuss ideas, philosophy, business, and civic improvement. The Junto became a breeding ground for innovations that shaped Philadelphia. Through these discussions, Franklin helped establish America's first lending library, the first volunteer fire department, the first public hospital, and the University of Pennsylvania. His ideas didn't stay trapped in notebooks, they became real, physical improvements to society. Franklin believed that communities were built not by governments alone, but by citizens who cared enough to take action. He modeled the idea that instead of complaining about problems, one could simply create solutions. As Franklin's influence grew, so did his reputation as a diplomat. His humor, charm, and intelligence made him uniquely capable of navigating conflict. Whether dealing with neighborhood disputes or colonial politics, Franklin had a calming presence, a way of diffusing tension with a clever remark or a thoughtful observation. This talent would eventually carry him far beyond Philadelphia, across oceans, into the heart of empires. But before Franklin became a global statesman, he faced one of the most complex parts of his personal life: his relationships. Walter Isaacson paints Franklin not as a flawless hero, but as a deeply human man with contradictions. He was ambitious, yet playful. Wise, yet sometimes careless. Social, yet distant from his own family at times. His relationship with his wife, Deborah, was tender but complicated. She supported him while he traveled for years in Europe, but their long separations created emotional distance. His relationship with his son William was another source of lifelong tension. Franklin loved him, mentored him, and helped him rise to power. But when the American Revolution approached, William sided with the British Crown. Father and son became political enemies, and their bond never fully healed. These personal conflicts remind us that greatness does not erase human flaws. Franklin's life was not perfect, he struggled with guilt, loss, and regret. But what made him remarkable was his willingness to reflect and grow, even late in life. He knew he wasn't flawless, and he embraced self-improvement as a lifelong journey rather than a finished state. By the mid-1700s, Franklin's achievements in science, philosophy, and community development made him one of the most respected figures in the colonies. And when Britain and France fought for control in North America, Franklin was sent to London in 1757 to represent Pennsylvania. This was the beginning of Franklin's transformation from an American thinker into a citizen of the world. His arrival in London was met with admiration. Scientists, philosophers, politicians, they all wanted to meet him. He moved through the grand halls of British society with ease, yet with a calm humility that made him liked by almost everyone. Franklin loved London. Its theaters, coffeehouses, debates, culture. He felt intellectually alive. Yet beneath the surface, tensions were growing between Britain and the colonies. Taxation. Representation. Rights. Franklin tried to reason with British leaders, believing that compromise was possible. He wanted harmony, not rebellion. He believed the colonies and Britain could coexist as equal partners. But British leaders dismissed the colonists' concerns. They laughed, ignored, or belittled his proposals. Over time, Franklin realized something profound: the British Empire would never treat the colonies with respect. The moment that changed his worldview happened in a humiliating public hearing. Franklin was summoned before the Privy Council, one of the highest bodies of the British government. There, powerful officials verbally attacked him for nearly an hour, mocking him, insulting him, even calling him a liar. Franklin stood silently, listening, his face calm, his body still. But internally, something shifted. The humiliation revealed the truth: diplomacy had failed. Britain would not allow equality. Franklin left the hearing with a quiet resolve. Something that had been only a faint possibility now became a certainty. The colonies would need independence. The man who once believed in unity would now become one of the architects of separation. His return to America was met with enormous expectation. People saw him as someone who understood the British Empire from the inside, someone capable of guiding the colonies through an uncertain future. And once home, Franklin stepped directly into the storm that would become the American Revolution. We will enter that storm together, calmly and thoughtfully, in Part 3, where the story reaches its peak: Franklin the revolutionary, the diplomat, the peacemaker, and finally, the elder statesman leaving behind a legacy that continues to shape the world today. Franklin's return to America marked the beginning of a new chapter, quiet in appearance, but filled with some of the greatest decisions of his life. He stepped back into a land he loved, but one that was now on the edge of conflict. The colonies were restless, worried, and increasingly convinced that peace with Britain might be slipping away. Franklin felt the familiar ache of responsibility settling onto his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a calling. His years in London had given him clarity. The world he was returning to needed calm guidance, steady intellect, and above all, a sense of unity. He found himself immediately pulled into the conversations that would shape the future. In rooms lit by candlelight, men gathered to speak in soft voices about taxes, rights, and freedoms. Franklin listened more than he spoke. He sensed that the colonies were entering a moment where wisdom mattered more than emotion. He had always believed in reason, in the idea that people could be persuaded through logic and goodwill. But Britain's refusal to treat the colonies with respect had changed the landscape. Franklin, once a believer in reconciliation, now felt a quiet acceptance that independence might be the only path. When the Continental Congress formed, Franklin was invited to join. Delegates from across the colonies came together, each with different fears, hopes, and tempers. Franklin entered these gatherings with the calm presence of an elder statesman. Men often turned to him before speaking, seeking reassurance in his measured silence. He understood something essential: independence could only succeed if the colonies acted together. And unity, he knew, was fragile. Amid all these discussions, the task of drafting a declaration fell to Thomas Jefferson. A young, talented writer with a mind shaped by philosophy and Enlightenment ideals. Jefferson admired Franklin deeply. Though Jefferson wrote the first draft, it was Franklin who read it with the eyes of experience, the ears of diplomacy, and the heart of a man who had seen both sides of the ocean. His edits were gentle but precise. He understood the power of a single word, the weight of a single phrase. It was Franklin who softened the tone of resentment without diminishing its strength, turning anger into dignity. One of his most famous edits is small but meaningful. Jefferson originally wrote, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable." Franklin changed it to, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." With that shift, he removed religious framing and replaced it with reason, universality rooted in logic, not faith. It was a subtle but powerful transformation, aligning the Declaration with Enlightenment values. The day the Declaration of Independence was approved, Franklin felt a deep calm settling over him. Not excitement, not fear, something quieter. A kind of acceptance that the colonies had chosen their path. People often imagine that moment as loud and triumphant. But in truth, the room was solemn. The men present knew what signing the document meant. If the revolution failed, they would be considered traitors. Execution was a real possibility. Franklin, in his gentle way, reminded them, "We must all hang together, or, most assuredly, we shall all hang separately." It was humor, but also truth, delivered with the same calmness that made people trust him. As war began, Franklin's role shifted again. The colonies needed an ally. Britain was the world's greatest power. America was young, untrained, and vastly outnumbered. Without help, the revolution would falter. The only nation with both the resources and the motivation to assist was France. And so Franklin, at 70 years old, crossed the ocean to begin what would become one of the most extraordinary diplomatic missions in history. His arrival in France was met with an unexpected wave of admiration. The French Enlightenment thinkers adored him. Newspapers published his quotes. Artists painted his portraits. Men admired his scientific achievements, and women admired his wit and gentle charm. Franklin's simple clothing, a fur cap, modest coats, became a symbol of the American sage. In a society filled with elegance, powdered wigs, and elaborate etiquette, his simplicity felt refreshing, almost poetic. He did not pretend to be what he wasn't. And the French loved authenticity. Franklin used this affection not for personal gain but for America's survival. Through carefully chosen words, soft persuasion, and patient conversation, he built relationships with ministers, bankers, generals, and philosophers. He understood that diplomacy was not a battle of arguments but a dance of trust. He hosted dinners where conversations flowed like gentle currents, each remark nudging France a little closer to supporting the new nation. He wrote letters that blended clarity with warmth. He attended gatherings where his quiet presence carried more weight than speeches. The turning point came after an American victory at Saratoga. Suddenly, the colonies looked stronger than they ever had. And Franklin seized the moment. His months of calm, steady influence paid off. France officially recognized the United States and agreed to a military alliance. This was monumental. It changed the balance of the entire war. Without France, its navy, money, and weapons, the American Revolution may not have succeeded. Franklin stayed in France for many years, becoming a cherished figure across the country. Yet he never let admiration distract him from his mission. He remained focused, disciplined, always thinking of the lives at home depending on his efforts. Even during the darkest days of the war, when American troops suffered cold winters and shortages, Franklin continued to negotiate, to persuade, to keep the alliance alive. His calmness was a stabilizing force. When the time finally came to negotiate peace with Britain, Franklin once again played a central role. His reputation gave him advantages few diplomats had. British negotiators respected him. French negotiators trusted him. American representatives relied on him. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, officially ended the war and recognized American independence. When Franklin placed his signature on the document, it symbolized more than the end of conflict. It represented the fulfillment of a lifetime of service, curiosity, and dedication. Returning to America after 9 years abroad, Franklin found a young nation eager for stability. He was older now, slower in movement, but still sharp in mind. His body showed signs of age, yet his spirit seemed untouched by time. He joined the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, though illness often forced him to be carried in a special chair designed just for him. Even so, his presence in the room shaped discussions. He rarely spoke for long, but when he did, the room quieted. Delegates listened. His calm voice carried weight, not because of authority, but because of wisdom. During heated debates, Franklin often played the role of mediator. The delegates were building a new government from scratch. Disagreements were natural. But Franklin understood that unity mattered more than perfection. He encouraged compromise, reminding everyone that no form of government could be flawless, just as no human being could be flawless. What mattered was cooperation, not competition. His influence helped ease tensions, making the final Constitution possible. In his final years, Franklin turned his attention to a cause that had long troubled him: slavery. Earlier in life, he had owned enslaved people, reflecting the norms of his time. But Franklin was a man who believed in self-examination. He grew. He learned. He changed. By the end of his life, he became one of the most outspoken critics of slavery. He joined abolitionist societies, wrote articles condemning the practice, and petitioned Congress to end it. It was a powerful example of moral evolution, proof that wisdom is not a fixed destination but a lifelong journey. As his health declined, Franklin continued writing, experimenting, and engaging in public debates. He remained curious until the very end. His home in Philadelphia was filled with papers, inventions, books, and letters, evidence of a life lived fully and intentionally. In April of 1790, at the age of 84, Benjamin Franklin passed away surrounded by family. News of his death spread across America and Europe. In Philadelphia, 20,000 people attended his funeral, an enormous crowd for that era. In France, the National Assembly held a moment of silence. Writers, philosophers, scientists, and ordinary citizens mourned him. He had touched lives across continents. His influence had crossed oceans. Voltaire's famous praise echoed through the world. He snatched lightning from the sky and the scepter from tyrants. It was not just poetic, it was true. Franklin's life offers countless lessons, but perhaps the most important is that greatness is built through small, consistent actions. It is shaped by curiosity, humility, reinvention, and service. He was not born wealthy. He was not gifted with privilege. He was simply a boy with a mind eager to learn and a heart eager to contribute. And through a lifetime of reading, experimenting, improving, and helping others, he became a symbol of possibility. Walter Isaacson's biography reminds us that Franklin's genius was not in perfection, but in progress. He changed careers fearlessly, embraced new identities, and allowed himself to grow beyond his own limitations. He understood that knowledge was endless, and so he never stopped seeking it. His story invites us to reflect quietly on our own lives. What skills can we learn? What problems can we solve? What habits can we shape? What communities can we help build? Franklin's life whispers a simple message. You are allowed to reinvent yourself. You are allowed to grow. And you can choose, at any moment, to become a better version of who you were yesterday. His legacy lives not only in the institutions he built, or the inventions he created, or the documents he shaped, but in the spirit he carried, a spirit of curiosity, humor, humility, and service. This completes the calm, slow, reflective telling of his remarkable journey, a journey that continues to inspire leaders, thinkers, artists, inventors, and everyday dreamers around the world. Thank you for watching Wise Book Summaries. If you enjoyed this journey into the extraordinary life of Benjamin Franklin, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a life-changing book summary. Tell us in the comments which book you want next. Your suggestion might be our next episode. Until then, keep learning, keep growing.